Greetings, dear friends. Your invaluable support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This greatly helps the growth of our channel. Leave your comments. Your feedback is very valuable to us. And now, to the most important and current world events. Let's go.
Residents of the Ukrainian capital heard air raid sirens last night, but there were no explosions in the city and air defense systems were not activated. Military correspondents from both sides explained the operation of the sirens by the presence of reconnaissance drones in the sky. It was these that the alert systems were responding to. A similar situation was observed in Kharkiv and other cities in Ukraine. According to the country's residents, for the first time in years of fighting, the situation is generally calm. The day before, Russia announced an Easter truce, which implies a halt to all hostilities from 6 in the evening on Saturday until the end of Sunday. Ukrainian authorities stated that they would act reciprocally. Silence in response to silence, strikes for defense against strikes. The main news on RBC. In the studio, Nikita Gemiza, Ukrainian military, attacked several cities in the Kherson region, despite the truce announced the day before. This happened after 6 in the evening, stated the governor of the region, Vladimir Saldo. He claims that the armed forces of Ukraine used drones and mortars. Aleshki, Hola Pristan and Kakhovka came under attack. There is no information about destruction and casualties. However, on certain sections of the front there is silence. No shelling from the armed forces of Ukraine is observed, concluded Saldo. The Russian Ministry of Defense has not yet commented on the adherence to or violation of the Easter truce by the parties last night. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in turn claims that Russia allegedly continued to use artillery and drones in certain directions. Referring to the report of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, he stated that battles took place in the territories of the DPR, LPR, and Zaporizhzhia region. He pointed out the activity of the military in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. The armed forces of Ukraine respond to the actions of the Russian military with proportional forces and will continue to act in a mirrored manner, said Zelensky. At the same time, he noted that the situation in some directions has become calmer. He added that he is waiting for a response from Moscow to Kyiv's proposal to extend the complete ceasefire after the end of the Easter truce.
Overall, on Easter morning, we can assert that the Russian army is trying to create a general impression of a ceasefire, but sometimes does not abandon individual attempts to advance and inflict losses on Ukraine. Russia must fully comply with the conditions of silence. Our actions are and will be mirrored. The proposal to extend the regime of complete and unconditional silence for 30 days is on the table. The response must be given in Moscow. Ukraine, together with its partners, is ready to move towards peace as constructively as possible, but corresponding readiness is required from Russia.
At the UN. Following Russia's announcement of a truce, they called for a final ceasefire. The statement was published by the office of the organization's Secretary General.
We take note of the announcement by the Russian Federation of
From the temporary Easter truce, we consistently call for a lasting ceasefire in Ukraine and once again express our support for significant efforts to achieve a just, durable and comprehensive peace that fully supports the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Ukraine in accordance with the UN Charter, international law and relevant UN resolutions.
The decision on the Easter truce between Russia and Ukraine was welcomed by many countries around the world. The European Union stated that they are awaiting the actual cessation of the conflict. They also added that they will continue to support Kyiv. Only a ceasefire and negotiations can save lives, wrote the official representative of Hungary's ruling party on social media. In Belarusian media, there is hope that the Easter truce will be a step towards de-escalation and will allow for a transition to diplomatic resolution. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan noted that they view the decision as an important step towards establishing a sustainable peace. The Easter truce has become the focus of global media attention. The British Sunday Times believes that Putin's statement is likely aimed at a domestic audience rather than an external one like Donald Trump. At the same time, both Russia and the USA suggest that the window of opportunity for negotiations might close. However, Moscow will likely be able to, quote, keep Trump afloat with vague promises. The newspaper writes,
Although there is a sense that Trump cannot be kept waiting forever, Moscow is not yet willing to make any concessions. But due to Putin's conviction that he is winning the war, even talks of peace are seen as a concession. Meanwhile, the Kremlin wants a much more comprehensive deal. Trump's special representative hinted at such a possibility when he acknowledged that his talks with Putin touched upon not only the issue of disputed territories, but even NATO and Article 5 of the alliance's charter. For the Russian president, this seems like an opportunity to reshape Europe's security architecture and restore Russia as a great power.
CNN featured materials about the Easter truce on the main page. It states that the moment will be a rare sign that both sides can cease hostilities for a short period. But at the same time, each will use violations to show that their opponent cannot be trusted. Fox News links the temporary ceasefire to Trump's announcement that the mineral agreement will be signed with Ukraine within a week, and with the fact that US authorities previously reported readiness to cease attempts to regulate the conflict if Trump realizes that the parties are unwilling. What role will the Easter truce play in resolving the conflict in Ukraine? What reaction should be expected from Washington? And what are the chances of extending the ceasefire? We will discuss this now. We are joined by Mavses Gazarian, an expert in international relations. Mavses, good day or even good morning. Thank you for joining us. What goals, first and foremost, is Moscow pursuing by declaring the Easter truce? And can it be said that this is a diplomatic gesture against the backdrop of Washington's statement about disappointment with the pace of negotiations and words about a possible withdrawal from them?
Good morning, colleague. Yes, hello. Indeed, this is quite an important moment. Here, essentially, is an attempt to implement the Easter Truce initiative. Yes, this could indeed be a very important, essentially stabilizing, let's say, step, not only in the situation of the conflict in Ukraine, but actually in the international situation as a whole. And this could actually become such a step towards a broad compromise and overall stabilization of the international situation in the countries of the Western community. And I believe that the fact that this initiative is not receiving full support, full development, is what calls into question, so to speak, the situation with international stability as a whole, international relations as a whole. With this step, Moscow actually tried to demonstrate not only its, well, let's say, moderation as a political player, but also essentially to create conditions for, well, sort of at least some measures to be demonstrated, let's say, to be continued, demonstrating room for maneuver, because this step, in fact, besides addressing certain diplomatic issues that Moscow faced, diplomatic, let's say, steps that needed to be taken by Moscow, this step was also supposed to, well, sort of contribute to, well, a certain level of trust, at least in the long run. And this would be very important, such a humanitarian component in the current conflict. This is something that could, well, let's say, to some extent, create a certain emotional backdrop in the bilateral interaction between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Of course, this aspect can also be interpreted, as many international observers write, as an attempt by Moscow to demonstrate that, so to speak, the ball is no longer in its court if we talk about the diplomatic game. But I believe that this is a somewhat broader space for interaction. And here, of course, humanitarian aspects also played their role. Not least, when it comes to the interest of the Russian Federation in the foreign policy line of our country, it plays a significant role. There is also the factor of our country's positioning as a guardian on one hand of conservative values, traditional values, and the initiative of the Easter Truce itself carries such a nuance. And along with this, the commitment of the Russian Federation to humanitarian values, after all. This is about preserving human lives and so on. I believe that we have also been talking a lot recently about the activity of the administration. I believe that this moment is also related to the fact that, let's say, recently, the Western press has been talking a lot about how supposedly Trump is yielding to Russia and so on and so forth. And the implementation of such an initiative, primarily coming from Moscow, would be a demonstration that in the relations between the leader of the Western community, the United States, and the Russian Federation, there is still a very important role is played by certain trust, a certain equivalence. And, what is the uniqueness of Donald Trump's agenda in relations with the Russian Federation compared to previous administrations? We, of course, understand that this is not entirely the case, but nevertheless, the Trump administration is trying to start everything from scratch. And such initiatives are part of this logic. And we are also trying to work in this channel. That is, in a way, we are ready to consider, yes, that this administration is trying to build, in a comprehensive plan, yes, qualitatively different relations.
Once again, as if to restart, yes. But CNN generally writes that the ceasefire announced by Russia may incline Washington to be pro-Russian in the context of negotiations. Do you agree with this?
I don't think it's appropriate to talk about the United States, about the line of the United States administration as pro-Russian. Actually, no. After all, it is quite a self-sufficient, so to speak, ruling team and group to be qualified in such a way. And statements of this kind are most likely reflections of some internal factional struggle in the countries of the Western community. This is not the case at all.
And
it is worth noting, after all, the current ruling group, and in the ideological context, they are still very consistent players.
yes,
Both in the Western press and in the Western expert community, questions are raised about such aspects as their competence. Well, to be frank, I'm talking about what our colleagues, experts, and journalists in the United States and Europe are discussing, but no one doubts that they are still ideologically consistent players with their own vision and understanding. That's what we saw with you. Recently at the meeting between the President of the United States and the Chair of the Council of Ministers of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, they still have a certain consistent understanding, even the statement that let's make the West great again. That is, it's not just about some inconsistent, chaotic line, as it seems to some of our colleagues, but still there is an understanding that the team in the White House and the allies of this team, for example, in European countries have a comprehensive understanding and vision
of what
the West should indeed aspire to maintain its leadership in the 21st century by establishing certain interactions, for example, with the People's Republic of China, which is the main opponent to the hegemony of the United States, to the status of the United States, and also with the Russian Federation as one of the already global powers, if we talk about the current international architecture.
Let's return to the decision about the truce. Washington has not commented on it yet, even though quite a bit of time has passed, more than 16 hours. Why is there no reaction, and when will it appear? What do you think it will be like? What do you expect?
In this situation, when we talk about the initiative itself, its humanitarian component, its political component, it has one specific weak point, and that weak point is the leadership of Ukraine. In this puzzle of the Ukrainian conflict, the attempt to regulate the Ukrainian conflict, there are several key players. These are Russia, the United States, Europe, and Ukraine. The first two players, Russia and the United States, are the two most predictable players in the current situation. But all the others are completely unpredictable. That is, Washington, to some extent, is forced to consider other players who, unlike the United States and the Russian Federation, are still less predictable, less understandable. So I believe that this is about assessing certain risks. This could be the likelihood of this initiative being actualized. So to speak, formally, it's not even about the fact that this time has passed. Yes, this time of Holy Easter. So I believe that Washington does not want to make any loud statements that will later be nullified due to the disagreement of one of the parties. And this is a very interesting point for Donald Trump in the Ukrainian direction of American foreign policy and overall Western foreign policy. Donald Trump, come hell or high water, his administration needs at least some noticeable, but still a bright success. Because the agenda of this administration, compared to its predecessors, is built on the fact that they do not start, but finish or resolve conflicts. This is critical for the United States. It is also important in the context that Washington needs to free up a huge amount of its resources, efforts, and attention in diplomatic, political, financial areas, and so on. Washington needs to free up a lot of efforts and resources from the Ukrainian direction to activate and update the Chinese direction of American foreign policy. China should be, so to speak, in the crosshairs of American diplomacy, American soft power, and so on.
So am I correct in understanding that until Washington does not comment, because of what? Because for now, they are afraid to comment too much, or to avoid taking sides, or what? Or are they waiting for some specifics on the further development of the truce?
That, I think, yes, Washington is waiting. What are our risks? What risks might there be, so to speak, in the situation of implementing this agreement? This is in the situation of working through. That is, at the very least, a potential risk could be, for example, Kyiv's disagreement on certain aspects. We've already heard this, actually. These could be decisions by other players, for example, European ones. That is, in a situation where it concerns an agreement, an arrangement reached by Russia and the United States. There are no problems for the American administration, but where a lot depends on other entities directly here. Washington is, in a way, navigating a diplomatic minefield.
I see. Moses, we have little time left. One last question. Do you believe in general in the success of further settlement that might begin after this Easter truce? Will it work out like that?
You know, when we talk about the success of a particular truce formula or settlement formula, yes, we must start from the fact that a truce is possible when all parties are, firstly, sincerely, so to speak, positively inclined towards achieving a real result in terms of settlement. That's one. And the second point is when the parties are ready to consider each other's interests. That's two. And thirdly, there are no parties that will obstruct this, as for everything. Concerning the United States and the Russian Federation, our countries are currently, in my opinion, generally interested. Even if we are not talking about a truce, that is a settlement, but rather about some kind of status quo. In my opinion, our countries have already reached this point. However, unfortunately, we have little time, yes, but in general terms, I will say that what is happening in our bilateral relations is quite unique. If it comes to the point that we are moving towards some kind of status quo on the Ukrainian front with the United States, this is exceptionally positive. But the United States indeed needs to fully sort things out with Europe, fully sort out the positions of its other partners in the Western Bloc.
In general, for now.
There are many such positions.
For now, there are too many, yes, actors to understand where this settlement is heading and where the truce is leading, what it might result in. Moses, thank you very much. We were joined by Moses Gazarian, an expert in international relations. We talked about the Easter truce, which was announced by the Russian president the day before. It will, I remind you, end on Monday night. The Russian military has not reported any violations of the truce. The Ukrainian president has reported several such cases, shelling and assault actions in various directions. Let's move on. Russian servicemen have returned to Moscow as part of a prisoner exchange with Kyiv. The special flight landed at night. The day before, Russia and Ukraine conducted a prisoner exchange under the Formula 246 for 246. In addition, Ukraine received 31 wounded prisoners of war and 15 wounded returned to Russia. The exchange, as before, was conducted with the mediation of the United Arab Emirates. Let me remind you, the last time the sides exchanged prisoners was on March 19th under the Formula 175. The Easter service took place at the main cathedral of Moscow, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior.
Christ is truly risen indeed.
Before the start of the procession and liturgy, the Andrew I Colt Foundation delivered the Holy Fire from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Thousands of people gathered for the night Easter patriarchal service. The president and the mayor of Moscow also attended. We will continue to follow the events.